All right, we are back to another matchup. It's round 5. I'm back with Samuel,
Hi, everyone.
and we have a spicy one. We have the new teddy bear, more or less new, not that new anymore, but the fancy, very hyped teddy bear on the right side versus a an old card that has been unbanned some time ago. It's Breya. Definitely a matchup we haven't seen so far. So I would expect the usual combo lands on the right side versus a 4-color good stuff pile, or maybe the deck is also playing with some affinity toys, but I think apart from Marcus, no one really did that.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I think the I would say that the lists that we have seen from Breya seem to be pretty much the lists that we thought we'd be seeing.
mhm,
Um, with I would say pretty normal um 4-color control or some artifact synergies, but not that much piles, and it hasn't been like a meta dominating deck at all, like we kind of thought when it got unbanned. We were like the cards that are already unbanned seem much stronger, or the cards that are in the format normally, as
yeah.
opposed to like how we're seeing Tazigor perform after its unbanning. We've seen a lot of Tazigor that might be a bit overrepresented because a lot of players have a lot of nostalgia for the card
Mm.
and might be
And we also
seeing
have some
more.
cards that synergize well with the commander. For example, Cosmogolf is a fancy card that you can include in the 99, and people just want to experiment with the card again, as you
Yeah,
said.
yeah. And also a lot of MTGO play kind of weighs in on those statistics
Yeah.
where we had Cloud very popular for a very long time on MTGO, and it seems to be falling off a little bit now.
Mhm.
And I think if you are a person that that likes to play MTGO and plays it a lot, you can actually affect kind of the metagame um, readings on that we have at least from MTG Top 8, where a single player couldn't really do that in paper.
Yeah. That's true.
So
And also, the dynamics, at least from my experience. And right now it's the same. You play a league on MTGO and you face so many Tazikos because everyone wants to try it out. And then you end up in playing your deck. It's basically a Taziko boot camp. And at some point it was a Cloud boot camp and a Breya, Asmo, whatsoever. People were just hyped to play the unbanned or newly unbanned cards. So yeah.
yeah,
And that is obviously influencing the statistic. Looking over at the game, lots of things happened here already. We had a turn 1 exploration on Lumra's side, which is really, really good. And Urza Saga finding an amulet is probably even better.
yeah, and we saw a very fast Lumra cast here. I think we're at turn 3. Um, However, the Lumba trigger did whiff.
Yeah.
Um, so and the Emperor of Bones managed to exile the Wooded Foothills. So
It's
yeah,
quite unlikely
also
that the trigger doesn't bring back any land. I mean, it did not whiff. At least it brought back the Urza Saga.
well, yeah, but the Urza
Um,
Saga got that turn, so it was already
exactly. Yeah.
in play. It was so,
Well,
but
at least you return the land. But I get your point.
yeah, and I mean the issue is like, of course, he isn't just dead, which he could be if there was so like once the Urza Saga pops again, it can get a Zuran Orb, and
Yeah, exactly.
with the Zuran Orb and the Shifting Woodland and the um, Aftermath Analyst, that's an infinite combo.
Yeah.
So and Emperor of Bones is gonna get to exile that right away. Then again, he is also looking at a big Lumra on board, which might get bounced here. And this is a very fast Lumra, and as long as that isn't countered and there's no necking in the mana, then there's very little that you can do against this sort of board, which is in my opinion one of the most toxic aspects of the deck is that w- these fast starts are basically impossible to deal with for any mid-range slash fair deck.
Absolutely. That's exactly the reason why people almost dodged all the fair decks, and we tend to include some unfair aspects into any 99, if you think about it. Either you have like decks that use the graveyard as a second hand and, go for massive value
Yeah,
and
but I mean, what is like there are a couple of fair decks, things like Yoshi, um, things like
in
Philia,
that
things like
regards. Yeah,
Cloud,
I see. Okay.
and all these decks, they have very little to put up against.
I mean, Cloud could tech some things. I'm not sure. There was this 2 mana, 2/3 Tonki Toki. I'm not sure how the card is called. But you know the one for double white that says lands from graveyard can't enter. I think that
I think
was the
it's called
wording.
Tomic.
Tomic. Thank you. Yeah.
Um, but like that's I mean, sure that could be something, but you still have to mulligan to that card. You still have to find the card,
Oh, you can
and in
swap
this case,
because
oh,
it's a
you can swap
legendary.
to it. True, true. That might
So
be.
that was always the power of White Weenie, right? That you have so many great legendary creatures against several archetypes. You have Thalia against Storm. You have Kataki if Affinity gets a thing, which might probably not be the most attractive card in a deck that features a couple of artifacts at least itself. So, but you get my point, right?
Yeah.
And I also get your point regarding Lumra. Mm, it is what it is. I mean, the format kind of developed through
Yeah.
certain, not necessarily through certain unbans. Maybe if you're talking about Tazigor, but if you have a look at the other cards that were unbanned, almost none of those cards are played these days. For example, there was Thrazen and Necrotic Ooze being unbanned at the same time. We didn't see
Yeah.
any bruise of it. I mean, I haven't looked for it specifically on MTG Top 8, to be fair, but I
I don't think
didn't
that
see
is
anything
a
in
very
that.
viable archetype. We have
Yeah,
like
me neither.
for example, the deck on the right that we're looking at here, it has presented a very good plan all around, while also being able to just present this combo line.
Yeah,
So now
absolutely.
what he can do now is he's floated all his mana, he's activated the mirror pool on his Lumra, which will put a token copy of Lumra onto the battlefield, which will get
Mhm.
legend rolled right away. Oh no, he puts Lumra in the graveyard. Okay. And sacks all his lands in response to the trigger, keeping one around so that the copy of Lumra is still alive. If he goes to 0 lands, then Lumra's a 0/0, and then the trigger will resolve again. Bring back. He's oh no, he's okay. Yeah, he's milling, and then the Zoran Orb will the Amulet of Vigor will untap those lands, and now he gets to make a whole bunch of mana.
Yeah.
Um, keep doing
And there
that.
are different ways to win. I think the cleanest line right now is to finish with Basing See,
Yeah, so he
just
has a
to
Buzzing Z in
make
play. He can.
lots of big earthbend, like lots of big land creatures with the
Yeah,
earthbending ability. Since you can infinitely loop, you
he
don't draw
keeps
any
one untapped
cards.
land around.
Yeah, exactly.
He can
Or even
also.
two. I mean, your opponent at that point has 4 blockers, so you just create 5 creatures. That's fine.
Yeah, he also has
Some
the Mouth of
lists
Renome in play, so he can
kill all the
Mouth of
creatures, right?
Renome
Yeah,
all the
yeah.
creatures away.
And then you have a big
And
Lumra with which you can swing. Some decks even play the Sunscorched Desert. which always deals 1 damage on ETB, and then you can loop this one. So there are various ways to win on that
Yeah.
in that spot. And it seems that the Breya player wants to receive more information regarding the 99, so he lets his opponent play it out, which is totally fair. We also see that he's taking notes. I really like that. You know, um, maybe trying to get a better picture for game two, what to take care of and what not.
Yeah. I mean, I would expect most players to have seen this list by now. Um,
Yeah,
so
but at
yeah.
that point, remember the tournament is from beginning of January,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
so it was roughly a bit more than a month that Alex was winning the Mox Emerald, and at that point, Lumra really got popular. So 4 weeks over Christmas is not that much to get familiar with it, you know. So I think it's fair to
Yeah.
say that at this point, maybe not everyone was familiar with it, and he keeps revealing cards. Clearly,
So I'm not sure if he has announced like
I think
what he's
I think
doing.
they just talk about it. I mean, yeah, and the Urza's Cave can search for something,
Ah,
and there is the
okay.
Sunscorched Desert.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So this will end in infinite damage, and that's enough for
Interesting.
the
I feel like I'm not sure what kind of loops he's assembling outside of that, but I feel like when you have, for example, the Basing Say, um, and the Mouth of Renorm and the Talon Gates, where you have these lines that do actually handle the things going on the board, and then you can attack with a very big earthbent creature. Not really sure why you also then play the Sunscorched Desert, which is a card that will sometimes, um, like there are hands that you have which will probably include like 3 or 4 colorless lands and not a single green mana, and that
yeah,
you
yeah,
might have to
absolutely.
mulligan because of that. So, like, I
And
feel like
I think here, by the way, I like that attitude. So we saw he was actually looking at the cards that he wrote down, deciding whether or not the lightning bolt could be useful, and he decided, well, there might not be too many targets presented, so I will rather surveil that one,
yeah,
which is correct. There are a couple of targets, but not too many, and the bear itself will definitely survive a lightning bolt. I totally get your point regarding the desert, and I think that's the point why most of the lists do not include it these days, simply because the colored mana is sometimes too relevant, and the deck does win
yeah,
outside of that. You know, there's also the Thought Knot Seer. So if you cannot win through damage, you can still go for the Thought Knot Seer loop that will result in your opponent drawing their entire library, which is also a fine win if you ask me. Might be a bit harder to assemble, but
how
usually
does
once you explain to your opponent that you can present a loop,
yeah,
they will most likely concede. Here, by the way, we have the Dowdy. Dowdy is one of the best cards, I think, against Lumbra, as at least based on what Lumbra players told me. That Dowdy is
yeah,
definitely one of those nasty cards. Sitting in the same boat with Dranev, which could also come from a Breya, but might be unlikely, I would say. So yeah, let's see
interesting
if
combo of burgeoning and exploration.
yeah, I think it's
You might see a fast Lumra
definitely
cast, but I don't know if
yeah.
it's, like, the correct thing to be doing. Like, for example, this Ice Explorer also. Ah, okay. So he has a Soaring Microspawn that will probably get the Mouth of Renome, I'm guessing?
I would expect that, yeah. I mean, this is the more or less the only way that you can get rid of the Dowdy. I think there's also the fight spell. Oh, yeah, and yeah,
Yeah.
here's a map of Ronom. That makes sense. Very costly with an activation of 5 plus tapping it,
Yeah, it also
which
means that he will have
means
to play his Prismatic Vista.
yeah, and it will be exiled with the Dowdy, unfortunately. Yeah, Dowdy really shuts down lots of things the deck wants to go for. I mean, the Breya player is not really pressuring that much, but as long as Dowdy is around, it keeps everything in check.
Yep. Which
There's
likely it won't be next turn, but we'll see how that goes. I think thinking about it, it might be. I feel like Rest in Peace as a card is becoming more and more relevant, and
yeah,
and
if
there might be a list to kind of find which which uses like a
Helm.
leyline Rest in Peace Helm
Hmm.
um constellation.
There was an ARG list from the 300 players Lyon tournament
Yeah,
that was actually playing Rest in Peace and Helm as a cheesy combo finish, which no one expected. At that point, the Storm deck was still legal also,
yeah.
so that was a pretty good fit.
Could also be a could also be a line to play Ketramos and play the deck even more controlly than I was playing it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Which I mean, the only issue with those, what like the I say that not the only, the biggest issue with that pile, as I kind of saw it and as I played it for me, was that you have these matchups like Aragorn or probably Aang, um, where like you're playing against blue or white, and you really want your Ketramos to resolve, but the chance that it resolves and sticks are so low
Yeah.
that playing that the rest of the deck suddenly becomes pretty weak. Um,
And
and
also, isn't it that Rest in Peace isn't that good in Kid Ramos because it only draws you a card the turn it comes down and exiles everything? But
exactly, like
since the
afterwards,
effect, yeah, yeah.
it's pretty bad. And the fact that the ley line is much better because it only affects your opponent's graveyard
Hmm.
and means that
You can still use
um,
your relic effects on your
on your own
graveyard and
graveyard and draw
yeah,
cards.
yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and it's not like an auto win against a lot of other cards. And sure, there's Solitude that you can pitch cards to, but it's not like a red deck that lets you kind of cycle through the cards
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
in your deck or library. So there might be it might be that playing playing that combo should be more at home in either a white blue shell that does actually counter spells and kind of, yeah, but maybe the Ang list, but I feel like Ang is one of those cards that doesn't um one of those decks that doesn't quite do it in terms of keeping control of the board as the commander. It's a like a 2/3. It's not the
Absolutely. I
best
also think
stats.
I guess it was rather one of those silver bullets that no one would expect from that archetype.
Yeah.
And I assume the player was successful with that, more or less. Otherwise, they would have not made into top 16, I think. I'm not entirely sure. Top 8, top 16, something like this. Meanwhile, we have 2 flying creatures on the board,
Lots of lands.
lots of lands,
We might
not
see.
really much happening as expected. The mouth of Ronom was taking care of the Dowdy. Here we have the Hidden Grotto, the 5-color surveillant, if you so will, just with a slight downside
Yep, and
in
next turn
regards to
he's gonna start trying to resolve Lumra. which will be pretty strong once it comes down. And from what I see in the Breya player's hands, there's a Force Spike, which isn't going to do much, and not sure what else.
By the way, I really like the maybe you have missed it because we were talking about Ketramos, but the decision to not play the second land or the prismatic vista with the additional land play from exploration, but rather to show your opponent, or at least to pretend as if you don't have another land to pay for the Mouth of Ronan next turn, and then wait for the land drop of your opponent. You know, it's like it's a very tiny
Yeah, I
thing,
understand. Like, I
but
understand the thought. I think it in the end, it didn't make that much
it
difference,
doesn't matter that
but,
much
like,
exactly, but
yeah,
I like the idea
I get
that
it.
he thought about it, you know, that
Yeah.
and
So he
also the
also
other
has
players
a
like taking the notes, and I like the thought or the thoughts that
yeah,
both bring to the table.
yeah, I think so too. So
So
this
here, I
is
think the life totals are not correct. I think the right player should be at
9 because he just took 3
9
from
exactly. Yeah, he
Strix
just took
and
3, so
Phoenix.
that's yeah.
I guess the Lumra's gonna be played here, and he's probably gonna exile, um, not
He's
sure
going
what he's
for
he's copying
the
the
Lazo tap activation for Ice Tail
okay,
Explorer.
am that I don't like that at all because 'cause he's got a Cling to Dust in his graveyard.
That's true. Yeah.
I mean, sure, he only gains 3 life, but the Lumra would have been much stronger here, also being able to block the Detective's Phoenix and even the Strix.
Yeah, I think he realized that this was some kind of a mistake.
Yeah, I think he blew himself out there, but yeah, we'll see. So we've got a
Oh, we have it.
Pyroglyph on top,
Mhm. That
which
looks juicy.
he's got 3 more damage, so could take him to 6. Then we've got instant and land, definitely. We have
I'm not sure
sorcery from
the
the
Rumble. Yeah.
Rumble. Okay, yeah, he bottoms both because he wants a counterspell for
But he
um
has the counterspell already, or is it a force spike? Is it a
it's a
force
force
spike
spike.
or
Yeah, it's a
okay,
force
okay,
spike.
okay. Yeah. Well, then
I
you
think it
will
makes sense um to not keep the Pyroglyph. I mean, I th that could have been better.
so now he should be at 7, right? They ignore the life pad at least for now. Okay.
Yeah, he's at
Taking
6.
care. Which means the Lumra player is basically dead. There are 4 artifacts on board. Next turn there will be enough mana to activate Breya twice, and then he will just be double bolted.
Yeah,
And since all those lands return tapped, okay, going up to 7, that helps a little bit, but then again, there are
yeah,
2 flyers and
he gets to
you
attack all with his 4 flyers, and then
oh, even 4 flyers, right? Yeah,
only one guy gets blocked. So,
true. So
yeah,
not that big
interesting.
of a deal. Sakura
9
Tribe
minutes
Scout
on the clock is
is
might
rough, I
be,
think, for either deck.
yeah, it's gonna be rough for either deck to finish.
I mean, Lumra is definitely favored here to close that
Yeah,
game in a fast manner, comparison to the mid-range Breya. I think by now we can say it's a mid-range list. Unfortunately, we do not have the list. So for the editing, I will have to pick up the cards individually.
yeah, so he's just showing him how he wins the game.
Yeah.
He takes combat damage to yeah, and now they're like, "Okay, we have 8
Yeah, and I
minutes,
mean,
let's shuffle up and play."
if you block one of those, he will most likely block the Phoenix. Phoenix goes to the graveyard. You have 2 damage, and then, yeah, as I said, you have the double bolt
Yeah,
from sacrificing 4 artifacts. Over
yeah.
to the
At
third
6,
game.
2 minutes to resolve those mulligans. The fungus
Yeah.
is a cool card. It's probably not gonna find that many targets until we start getting to Breya, and not sure if Breya is one of those cards that will like, it g gets it resolves pretty late in these
Mhm.
sorts of matchups. A Mental Misstep here would have been great.
I think
It's not the
before
case.
you before you actually activate the fungus on Breyer, you would rather use it to ramp
Draw a
yourself.
card and put a land into
Yeah.
play from your
Yeah,
hand, yeah, yeah.
I think.
I think that's one of the like, this card is a definite improvement for the lists that aren't playing that don't wanna play a Haywire Might only to find it off Wizard Saga. I also think it's
Yeah.
probably most of the time it's wrong to play a Haywire Might if you're only finding it off Wizard Saga.
It
Um,
depends on the list. It really depends on the list. If you're,
that's what
for
I'm
the
saying. If you have a Bright Glass Gear Hulk, then I agree that, like, as an additional card to be getting off Bright House Hearth Gear Hulk, that's pretty good, but, otherwise, it's a bit tricky.
I mean, I think here the idea is, and since I also featured a card in Tifa that you can find it with the Green Sun Zenith, and
Yeah.
the activation costs one more, but it's not conditional in comparison to Haywire Might, and sometimes there is a pesky creature artifact or enchantment. Yeah, even enchantment with the overlords, I would say. Um, then again, most of the time when you get to exile them, they're not yet creatures, so it's
Yep.
more or less an exception. But
So
what I was about to say is Thrasios Ravos was always featuring Haywire Might for obvious reasons. You have a 4-color mana base and you want to be able to cast that card as often as possible while also saving mana. You can't really afford to spend 2 more just to get rid of this permanent that currently disrupts your game plan. Because, the
I
mana
am not
calculation is quite. Yeah?
yeah. I'm not sure I like, not playing Ice Steel Explorer here, uh, because looking at his I mean, sure, you get to play the Aftermath Analyst comes into play and you get to Sylvan Scrying for but against a tapped out opponent,
I
I
get that,
th
but
this
isn't it that the Aftermath was actually providing the value that the Ice Explorer would have had now?
well,
Because
no,
Aftermath.
because he's 1 land drop behind where he would have been, and he gets another 2 land drops right away next turn, or another 1
Yeah.
extra.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah, might
I
have been the better line to go for that. That's true. So what do we see here? Okay, the treasure token is correct for a Fury. Bye-bye Analyst. Now it's probably
Lumra
good
time.
to have a decent Lumra flip, but there is a subtlety. Oh. So we have
And he
some.
puts the subtlety in the command zone? The Lumra in the command zone? Not sure if I agree with that either,
Me neither.
because now he needs
Would
another
have
soul. I mean,
probably
sure,
put it on top.
he gets to play the Ice Till and get more value with it.
Ooh, and now the Fable is flipping, which means if it
Next
isn't
turn
for Maze, Glacial Chasm whatsoever, and Maze is in the graveyard, by the way. Oh, there's an Urza's Cave. That could do the job. We have an Ice Till, but the opposition agent is actually taking care of Urza's Cave. Because, yeah,
true.
now the Ice Till is rather underwhelming. Next turn comes a Fury token.
Well, but I dislike looking at the cut time, where we're ticking up on time here, right? We're in extra turns. I
Mm.
don't like not casting um, especially against a Mazaveth, I don't like not casting, um,
Breya, you mean?
the what's it called? The opposition
L-
agent. Because it's still like sure, you can kind of bait your opponent into
Oh, you
doing
mean end of turn now?
something.
He would have had the
Yeah,
window.
yeah, he
Exactly,
would have had
because there
3
was
more
not enough.
damage,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there was not enough
and
mana to correct the Wizard's Cave right away. That's true.
yeah,
Because if that's the case, you need to keep it open in order to not die to Glacier Chasm.
exactly.
But yeah, otherwise, would have sealed the deal. That's true. Especially if your opponent gives you the information that he's empty-handed, right?
Yeah. So now
And
this
that,
is the 4th extra turn.
yeah, and that,
If he
yeah,
casts
and
the opposition agent last turn, he wins the game. He would have dealt 3 more damage,
right.
um, and be attacking with 2 Furies and an opposition agent this turn. Now he yeah, like the this is one of the reasons I don't like opposition agent that much, because if you wait to get your opponent with it, you give up a lot of tempo often
Mm-hmm.
in decks that play it. Like, for example, in this deck, it's more likely that you have something else to do with your mana. You can maybe have a counterspell or cast a consult the star charts or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, but in other decks where you play it as an out against combo, I feel like turn 2 or 3 with a dork or without a dork, you pass the turn with it open. If the opponent does something, great. If he doesn't, you still deploy it anyway because then it's a creature on the board. The opponent has to play around it, and you get to keep going with the rest of your game plan. Just giving up that tempo for and three turns worth of tempo is just I don't like it.
Yeah, yeah, I get that. The sequencing isn't the same in most decks. But even in your Terra deck, I'm not a big fan of it because, or in Slimefoot, people sometimes include it against Tifa, for example, because it denies the additional landfall trigger. But it's so easy to play around if your opponent passes a turn with a dog and 2 mana open. It's more or less telegraphed that there is an opposition agent waiting, and as you said, if they play like they're kind of forced to play it end of turn. And I get the idea that you kind of have to feature it during the Storm era, and that was the main reason why people included it. But nowadays I think it's not necessary anymore.
Yeah.
It can be helpful against Lumra too, but the natural quote unquote line goes through milling your entire library, which does not include any search. So here we are, as you said, 2 damage short, and yeah, I mean there is not really a line to find here to win the game for either of them,
Yeah, they
especially
would
because
go
it's
for
the
a draw
last
there.
turn.
I think
Yeah,
the crucial decision was not casting the opposition agent at
yeah,
the end of that turn.
definitely.
But that's the kind of thing where, you've already played for an hour, you're deep in the tank thinking what can happen, and then you just pass priority. And even if you regret it 3 seconds later, it's still tough beats.
Yeah. Either way, I think it
Yeah,
was a nice game. Some mistakes on both
absolutely.
sides, but happens, and we will see each other in round 6. Thanks for tuning
Thanks for
in.
watching.
See you next time.